Apple has decided to shift manufacturing to India.
The first iPhone started being assembled in India.
India now becomes a key player in Apple's global manufacturing network.
Apple has just achieved a milestone in India, becoming the third largest iPhone market globally.
By 2020, China made 90% of all iPhones. By 2025, India was making 1 in 5. This is how Apple pulled off one of the biggest supply chain shifts in tech history without breaking iPhone quality standard. Not because of cheap labor, that advantage had faded by 2015, but because China had built something incredibly hard to replicate. A manufacturing ecosystem with precision, speed, and scale. To understand how hard iPhone manufacturing actually is, consider this. Apple operates at sub 1% defect tolerance. In consumer electronics, that's extreme. That means out of every 1,000 iPhones, only a single-digit unit can have any defect. Even if that's a scratch or a small misalignment of camera or even just a slightly loose button. For context, most global electronic manufacturing runs at 2 to 3% defect rate. That's considered quite good. For Apple, this was unacceptable. By 2020, iPhone made over 90% of all the iPhones globally sold. Foxconn's China facility alone employed 330,000 workers. During peak seasons, they could produce hundreds of thousands of iPhones per day during peak output periods. But then, 3 things converged. One was COVID-19 lockdown. In late 2022, it shut down Foxconn's plant. Millions of iPhone 14 units were disrupted during the holiday season. 2. US-China trade tensions created tariff risks. If tariffs hit finished goods, Apple's margin structure would collapse. And 3, geopolitical risk. Relying on one country for the majority of your flagship product and your bottom line becomes a strategic vulnerability. So Apple needed a plan B, not a backup location, but a second primary manufacturing hub. The question was, where? Vietnam and India were the 2 realistic options. Vietnam had many advantages: an established electronics ecosystem, lower labor costs, and existing Samsung and LG operation. But Vietnam had a constraint: population size. To scale iPhone manufacture to 50 million plus units annually, you need a workforce over 200,000 people just in assembly, plus several 100,000 more across the component supply chain. Vietnam's working age population was roughly 55 million people. India's working age population was roughly 900 million. So India had the population scale advantage. But it had a serious problem. It had never manufactured complex consumer electronics at Apple's quality standards. Here is how Apple thought about that decision. If you had to draw it on a whiteboard, it would probably look like a triangle: scale, yield, and geopolitics. Apple needed all 3 in balance. Vietnam scored high on yield but low on scale. India scored low on yield but unmatched in scale, and of course geopolitical diversification. So Apple chose the variable that compounds over time, the ability to train a massive workforce and build an ecosystem from scratch. Now, let me explain what yield means in manufacturing. If you start with 100 iPhones on an assembly line and only 85 come out without defect, your yield is 85%. In China, the mature lines of Foxconn were running at 99% yield by 2020. So when Apple started trial production in India in 2021, initial yields were simply commercially unviable. Industrial estimates place them near break-even levels at best. At Apple scale, a 5% yield gap does not mean inefficiency. It means hundreds of millions of dollars written off and lost from their bottom line. To put that in perspective, if India had launched at 2021 yield level and tried to scale immediately, Apple would have lost more money in defect than the entire PL1 incentive was worth. Why was yield in India so low anyway? First, precision. An iPhone has over 200 individual components that go into that little phone. The gap between the glass and the metal frame must stay within sub-millimeter tolerances. If workers are not trained to that level, defects compound. Second, process discipline. Apple's assembly process involves hundreds of documented steps. Miss one step, such as applying the correct pressure when seating a connector, and you get intermittent failures that may only appear after shipment. Third, component quality. Even if final assembly is perfect, if locally sourced items like screws, adhesive, or packaging fail specification, the phone fails in quality of selling in the store. So the challenge was not just whether India could make iPhone. It was whether India could make iPhones that passed Apple's quality bar at scale without destroying unit economics. In 2021, the answer was unclear. Apple's India's journey actually started in 2017 with iPhone SE assembly, a low-volume, older model made primarily for the domestic market. But 2021 was when things became serious, driven by India's production-linked incentive schemes. Here is how PLI worked. The Indian government offered a 4 to 6% incentive on the incremental value of electronics manufactured and exported from India. The incentive would be paid over 5 years, but only if companies met production and investment targets. For Foxconn, Winstron, and Pegatron, this de-risked the experiment. If they built factories and things did not work out, they would at least recover part of the cost. But incentives alone do not solve manufacturing problems. They only make the experimentation financially survivable. In 2021, Apple faced immediate issues. In December 2020, thousands of workers protested at Winstron, Karnataka plant over wage disputes. Production just stopped for months, and Apple placed Winstron on probation. Later in 2021, Foxconn's factory faced a food safety incident. Workers protested, the facility shut down again. These were not just public relation problems. They exposed systemic weakness in labor management, dormitory conditions, and operational oversight. But what mattered was this: Apple did not pull out. Instead, it did what it had done in China 15 years earlier. It stayed, fixed the problems one by one, and invested in long-term capacity building. By the end of 2021, India had assembled roughly 16,000 crore worth of iPhone. Exports were roughly 11,000 crores. And India's share of global iPhone production was still 1%. That was tiny, but it was an important foothold. 2022 was the year the strategy shifted from India as a backup to India as a core mode. Here is what changed. First, Apple began manufacturing current generation models in India. In early 2022, Foxconn started producing iPhone 13, the previous year's flagship, for domestic sale. By September 2022, Apple did something unprecedented. It began manufacturing iPhone 14 in India within days of global launch. Traditionally, new iPhone models were produced exclusively in China for the first 6 to 9 months, while India received only the older models. The fact that iPhone 14 was assembled in Chennai roughly 10 days after the launch signaled the confidence and trust in Indian factories with early stage product ramp up. Second, yield improved dramatically. By mid 22, the Tamil Nadu facility was operating in low 90% yield range. This was still below China's mature line, but it crossed that threshold where unit economics made sense. So why did yield improve? Training. Foxconn ran extended training programs for assembly line workers, hiring tens of thousands of first-time factory workers, primarily women from rural Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. The training wasn't about tools. It was about process discipline, following hundreds of steps meticulously, exactly, every time for the entire shift. This is why manufacturing at Apple's level is difficult. It's not simply a technical problem. It's a human systems problem. Now, third, the component ecosystem began to localize. In 21, nearly every component was imported. By 22, items like chargers, cables, packaging, and select mechanical parts were produced locally. Local value addition increased from roughly 5% in 2020 to roughly 15% in 2022. This mattered because importing every component increases lead times, logistics costs, tariff exposure. Localization reduces all three and creates local employment. By the end of 22, India produced roughly $8 billion worth of iPhones. Exports reached roughly $5 billion, and India's share of global iPhone output rose to 5%. 3 factories for operation: Foxconn in Tamil Nadu, Vistron in Karnataka, and Pegatron joining in late 22. India had moved from trial phase to scale phase. 2023 was the year India became integrated into Apple's global strategy. 2 major developments followed. First, Apple opened the first ever retail store in India, Apple BKC in Mumbai and Apple Saket in Delhi. Tim Cook personally inaugurated them. The retail stores mattered for a simple reason. Apple doesn't open stores unless it controls the entire customer experience, from product to service. Opening stores in India signaled that Apple was now confident the locally made iPhone wouldn't create warranty or quality issues that would affect their brand. It was a public bet and trust on India's manufacturing quality. Second, Apple manufactured iPhone 15 in India at global launch. For the first time, all new iPhone was made in India at release, and the production gap between India and China shrank from months to weeks. But the biggest story was volume. In 23, India assembled roughly 1 lakh crore worth of iPhone. Exports reached roughly 65,000 crores, and India's share of global iPhone production rose to about 15%. That represented a 3-fold increase in 2 years. India moved from single-digit millions of iPhones in 21 to tens of millions by 23. Scaling production by 5 to 10 times does not just mean hiring more people. It means building new factories, training over 100,000 workers to the highest quality standard, expanding the supplier base, coordinating just-in-time logistics, and maintaining sub 1% defect tolerance while also rapidly ramping volume. This is not linear growth. It's compounding complexity. By 23, mature lines in India were consistently operating in the mid 90% yield range. Lead times were competitive and quality audits were passing with flying colors. This is when Apple made a strategic decision. India would no longer be a follower market. It would be a launch market. By 24, India was not just making iPhone, it was making Pro models. When Apple launched iPhone 16 in September 24, India joined China in assembling Pro and Pro Max variants at launch. This mattered because Pro models are harder to manufacture, involving advanced metal frame, more complex camera systems, and tighter process tolerance. Historically, only China handled early Pro product. India's inclusion signaled deep operational confidence. By 24, India produced roughly $17 billion worth of iPhones and exported over $12 billion. In 25, India produced roughly 22 million worth of iPhone and exported 17 billion. India's share of global iPhone production now reached about 20%. 5 factories were operational, 2 run by Foxconn and 3 under Tata Electronics, following the Vistron acquisition and Pegatron partnership. By 25, roughly 1 in 5 phones globally was made in India. The workforce story mattered just as much. By 25, Apple's India supply chain employed over 100,000 people directly and over 250,000 indirect. Foxconn's Sri Parambadur campus alone employed over 35,000 workers, primarily women from rural areas, many of them first-generation factory workers. As skills and wages rose, local spending supported 2 to 3 additional indirect jobs per worker. This is how manufacturing ecosystems are built, through capability accommodation. So what actually happened here? This was not about Make in India as a slogan. It was about making a calculated supply chain bet and India building the capability to execute. 4 factors made this work. Apple's commitment. Apple embedded engineers in Indian factories, ran joint training program, and maintained continuous quality audit. It treated India the way it treated China in the mid-2000s, as a long-term capability build rather than just a cost arbitrage play. Second, policy structure. The PLI scheme tied incentive to incremental production and exports. Companies could not collect incentives without delivering out. At the same time, India rationalized tariffs, one on hundreds of intermediate electronic components, improving unit economics. Third, the learning curve. Yield did not improve because of better machines. It improved because workers learned. Precision comes from repetition, and there are no shortcuts to that. It took roughly 18 months for lines to reach commercial viability and yields through daily iteration, process turning, and quality enforcement. India compressed what took China 10 to 15 years into roughly 5 by importing lessons rather than learning them by trial and error. Here is what most people miss. China didn't build iPhone manufacturing capability faster than India. China built it from scratch while Apple was also still learning how to design the iPhone supply chain. India had a 15-year playbook to copy. The question wasn't whether India could learn. It was whether OEMs like Apple would commit long enough for India to execute. The geopolitical hedge. By 25, Apple's goal was clear: to produce over half of US-bound iPhones in India by 26. This reduced exposure, disruptions, and geopolitical shock. India was no longer a backup. It was a second primary engine. Here is the question people get wrong. Did India succeed because of cheap labor? No, absolutely not. By 24, India's labor cost advantage had narrowed. Skilled assembly workers earned roughly $25,000 to $30,000 per month on average, compared to $400 to $500 in China. That difference mattered, but it was not decisive for a product that costs $800 to $1,000. The real advantages were threefold. First, scale of labor supply. China's working age population is shrinking while India's is growing. If you need to hire 200,000 workers in 18 months, India can do it. Most countries cannot. Second, ecosystem emergence. By 25, India was producing enclosures, batteries, camera modules, packaging, and many other parts. Local value addition had already reached 20% with a target of 35% by 27. Third, risk diversification. Manufacturing in one country is like flying with one engine. It's efficient until it fails. India gave a second engine. The lesson is simple. Global manufacturing capability is built through sustained iteration, commitment, enabling policy, workforce training, supplier localization, all produce compounding outcomes over time. By early 26, Apple had exported over $50 billion worth of iPhones from India since 2021. Mobile phones became India's largest export category, overtaking petroleum products and gems. India's share of global iPhone production rose from nearly zero in 2020 to roughly 20% by 25. And when Apple launched iPhone 17 in September 25, all 4 models, including Pro and Pro Max, were manufactured in India from day one. This was not the story of a country finally being able to manufacture. It was the story of how a partnership, a company made with a country, a strategic supply chain decision, a calculated risk, and built capability through sustained iteration. The question now is not whether India can manufacture, it's whether India can do this again and again over a broad range of products. Because if you can make an iPhone at Apple standard, you have proven you can build precision hardware at scale. The real test is whether this becomes a repeatable playbook for semiconductors, medical devices, EVs, and whether we can repeat this beyond one company. India has proved it can execute. Now, India has to prove that it can scale beyond this one success story.